Hi friends, welcome to my channel. This is the second part of Interesting Story, To Hunt a Spy. Chapter 6, A Bad Son-in-Law? I rang Ogilvy and told him that Ashton and Benson had disappeared, and I read him Ashton's letter. A bad son-in-law? Said Ogilvy. What the hell does he mean? I think he's saying that he's getting away from Penny in order to protect her, I said. I wouldn't do what he wanted, marry her at once and take her away from him. So he's taken himself away from her. He must think she's in danger if she's with him. I suppose you could be right, but it seems a bloody strange way to protect his daughter. Does she know? Asked Ogilvy. Not yet. She's on her way back from the hospital now. Ashton's left a note for her, too. If there's anything important in it, I'll let you know. Think she'll tell you? He asked. Yes. The funny thing is, sir, that last night I did ask her to marry me, and she accepted. She was going to tell Ashton when she got home, but he'd already gone to bed. Maybe he'd already left. If he'd only waited another couple of hours, he might have decided not to go. Well, don't blame yourself for that. There was a pause. Does Penelope know about your work for the department? No, I replied. Well, she has to know, and now's the time to tell her. What I want you to do is to search the house very carefully. See if you can find anything that might show where Ashton has gone. If there's anything you don't understand, bring it back to the office. I think there's going to be a lot of trouble over this. I didn't look forward to explaining to Penny about my work and why we wanted to search her father's house. I had a feeling that our relationship was about to change for the worse. Just then, I heard Penny's Aston Martin sports car coming up the drive to the house. I met her as she ran to the door. Jack Brent's car was now coming up the drive. "There's a man following me," Penny cried, and then she noticed Larry Godwin in the hall. "What's happening? Malcolm, who are these men? What's happened to Daddy?" "As far as I know, he's all right," I said, and took her into her father's study. I picked up the letter. "You'd better read this." As she read the note, her face turned pale. "But I don't understand." "What does he say?" She gave me the letter and went over to the window while I read. "My dearest Penny, for reasons which I cannot explain, I must go away for a while. I am not a criminal, and I have done nothing wrong. I do not know how long I shall be away, but please do not try to find me, and do not bring the police into this. My reasons are private. I shall be quite safe because my old friend, Benson, will be looking after me. It would make me very happy if you would marry Malcolm as soon as possible. I know that you love him, and I think he is a very good man. I am sure that the two of you will be very happy together, and I am equally sure that you will both look after Jillian. Please forgive me for my sudden departure, but it is in the best interests of all of us. Your loving father, George." I looked up. "I'm sorry. Penny." But I don't understand, she cried. Oh, Malcolm, what's happened to him? She came into my arms, and I held her close. I don't know, I said, but we'll find out. She was still for a while, but pushed me away as 2 cars arrived quickly. Malcolm, who are all these men? Have you told the police? Daddy said not to. No, I haven't told the police, I said quietly. Sit down, Penny. I have a lot to tell you. I hesitated, not knowing best where to begin. I told you I work for a company called McCulloch and Ross, and that's perfectly true. We do the work I told you about, and we do it very well. But the company is also a sort of secret government department which deals with economic and industrial information if it is important to the state. You mean you're some kind of spy? No, not a spy. But you were watching my father like a common spy, she said angrily. And was I just a means to an end? Did you get close to me just to learn more about my father? No. I looked her straight in the eyes. I didn't know anything at all about your father until yesterday, and I don't know much more now. She looked at me coldly. And these men in the hall, are they from your department too? Yes. Then I'd like to talk to the man in charge. I knew something was worrying Daddy. Now I know where it was coming from. You're talking to the man in charge, and you're wrong about your father, I said carefully. That stopped her, and she sat down suddenly. You are in charge? That's right. And you don't know what you are doing? She said, with a laugh of disbelief. I know what I'm doing, but I don't know why. It's become very complicated. Let me tell you how I got into this. So I told her everything. I told her about Nellie the computer and the secret color levels. I told her about Ogilvy and Kriegar. I told her much more than I should have told her. I told her how, after the acid attack on Jillian, I was told to watch and protect her father. I've not done a very good job so far, I said. Burr, I'll find him. You're not going after him. He said in his letter, I interrupted her. All I know is that your father is considered by some people to be a very important man. I don't know why. But he could be going into danger without realizing it. My job is still to find him and protect him. He's not in a position to do that properly himself. She started to cry quietly at first, and the tears ran down her face. Then she began to tremble, as if she was suddenly very cold, and I put my arm around her. She held on to me tightly. When your safe, comfortable world seems to be falling apart, you need to hold on to somebody. Oh, Malcolm, what am I to do? You must do what you think best. If you trust me, you'll help me to find him, but I couldn't blame you if you refuse. I haven't been open and honest with you. I should have told you all this yesterday. But you couldn't. You weren't allowed to. Malcolm, what are your men waiting for? For your decision. I want to search the house, and I can't do that without your permission. She came back to the desk and read her father's letter again. He wrote to me too, I said, and gave her my letter. She read it slowly, then gave it back to me. "Bring in your men," she said, in a voice which had no expression or feeling in it. We found a number of surprising things in that house, but none of them seemed to be of any use to us. There was no clue to tell us where Ashton could have gone. In the cellar, there was a very well-equipped laboratory, but none of us had any idea what sort of work Ashton had done there. Hidden behind a cupboard in Ashton's bedroom was a heavy steel door with the sort of lock you usually see only in banks. By measuring the walls, outside and inside the house, we discovered that there was a small, secret strong room there, so secret that not even Penny knew about it. While the other men were searching the house, Penny and I talked about her father's life. I asked her how long Benson had worked for the family. "He's been with us since before I was born," she replied. "He used to work in one of Daddy's factories, but he visited us at least once a week. Then when we came to live in this big house, he came to live here and work as Daddy's personal servant." We were still talking when Peter Michaelis, one of my searchers, came in to report that they had found nothing useful, but that in a room upstairs there was the biggest model railway he had ever seen. I didn't believe him and forgot all about it, because Ogilvy rang to tell me to come back to the office as quickly as possible. I explained about the secret strong room and the laboratory, and he promised to send some experts immediately to examine everything. Before I left, I looked for Michaelis and found him with the model railway. "You haven't time to play with that," I said angrily. "We're here on business, to find out about Ashton." Michaelis smiled. "This is business. To search this place thoroughly, we'll have to look inside every piece of this railway set. The whole thing is so big that we have to use the controls to bring everything back to this central point." I looked at the railway more carefully. It was very big and very complicated, all controlled from a central desk. There must have been about 2 kilometers of railway line, but Michaelis seemed to know how to work the controls, so I left him to search the 1,000 different pieces of equipment and went downstairs. Penny was waiting for me, her eyes flashing with anger. "Someone has been searching my room." "I know," I replied. "All the rooms in the house have been searched." "I think you could have trusted me," she said icily. "It's not a question of trust," I tried to explain. "I do my job in the way I was taught. I have to go by the book." "Then it's not the kind of book I'd want to read," she exploded, and we had our first big quarrel. Chapter 7. Ashton and the Russian Scientist. I was not in the best of tempers when I met Ogilvy back in the office an hour later. All I could tell him was that Ashton had obviously been prepared for escape for a long time. He had been frightened of something and had made his plans carefully, ready to be put into operation at any moment. Ogilvy had another problem. I had a meeting this afternoon with the minister and people from other departments. It wasn't easy. There are other people who don't want our department to be in charge of Ashton's case. "Lord Cregar, for example?" I asked. "How did you recognize him?" "He gets his photograph in the papers," I replied. "Well, His interest in Ashton goes back a long time. Before this department started, Ashton was dealt with by Kriegar's department. Kriegar badly wants to take Ashton's case away from us. However, today the minister decided that Ashton was still our case, and so it's still our job to find him. That means it's your job, Malcolm. I need permission to see level purple in the computer. Not possible. Don't be stupid, I replied angrily. How can I look for a man if I don't know anything about him? Either I get to see level purple tomorrow, or I resign. You're always in too much of a hurry, Malcolm. To begin with, I couldn't get permission for you to see level purple by tomorrow, and in any case, Ashton isn't in level purple. He's in level black, and you couldn't get permission to see level black in less than 3 months. That's it then, I said. I'd better go along to my office and type my resignation. Don't be a young fool, Ogilvy said sharply. He thought for a long minute, drumming his fingers on the desk. Suddenly he said, I've made up my mind, but if anyone ever knows of this, I could lose my job. Wait here. He went through a door at the back of his office, was away for several minutes, and then returned. Come in here. I followed him into a small room where there was a computer screen. I've opened level black for you, he said. You must read about Ashton, and only Ashton. There are other things in level black which are better for you not to know. You have my word. He nodded and left, closing the door behind him. I looked at the computer screen. On it was a message. No written notes to be made of anything in level black. I sighed and started to read about George Ashton's life, which had been a very full one. Alexander Chelyuskin was born near Novgorod in Russia in 1919. At the age of 12, he was such a good student that he was sent to a special school in Moscow where he made excellent progress, especially in mathematics. In 1936, he came under the influence of Peter Kapitsa, a brilliant Russian physicist who had studied for some years in England. Kapitsa changed the direction of Chelyuskin's studies from mathematics to physics, and Chelyuskin later played an important part in improving the quality of Russian weapons in the War of 1939 to 45. In March 1945, when the Russians discovered that the Americans had developed the atomic bomb, Chelyuskin was told to work on the development of a similar bomb for Russia. After the war finished in 1945, Chelyuskin became dissatisfied because he had to go on working on research into weapons, and he did not like what he was doing. He began to think about people, not physics and mathematics. He decided that he did not like Russian society and the direction which Russia was following after the war. He decided to kill himself, but without actually dying. He made a careful and complicated plan, and 3 months later it was reported that he had died in a fire. The burnt body of a man was certainly found after the fire, but it was not Chelyuskin's. So, at the age of 28, Chelyuskin arrived secretly in England. Unfortunately for the English, who had hoped to learn about Russian secrets from him, Chelyuskin refused to talk about his work on atomic weapons. He did not want to work as a scientist for the British government. What he wanted to do was to live in England as an ordinary citizen. The government officials and scientists who had been looking forward to his ideas could not understand him, but finally he got what he had asked for. He did almost exactly the same as he had done in Russia. He took another man's identity, this time an English soldier who had died in a traffic accident. Chelyuskin was taught to speak English, and when he finally took the place of the George Ashton who had died, he was able to live successfully as a member of English society. It was a strange new world for George Ashton. At first, he took a job in a shop, but this quickly bored him. He had been given some money to help him in his new life, and soon he started a business with a man whom he met at work. John Franklin was good at working with his hands. George Ashton was good at using his brains, and their business did well. Ashton married Franklin's daughter, Mary, and they had 2 daughters, Penelope and Jillian. 2 years later, Mary Franklin died, and Ashton looked after the 2 girls. At the same time, he worked hard to develop new chemical materials for industry, which gradually made him very rich. All this time, people from the British Secret Service were watching carefully to see if the man from Russia would do something extraordinary with his brilliant scientific mind. But Ashton concentrated on his business, and gradually the officials from the government lost interest in what he was doing. Ashton became more and more successful in industry, but no one paid much attention until I had sounded the alarm by my careless questions to the computer. Until then, the life of George Ashton, previously Alexander Chelyuskin, my future father-in-law, had run very smoothly in England. When I finished, I had been sitting in front of the computer screen for 2.5 hours, and I had a headache. I went back to Ogilvy's office, where he offered me a glass of whiskey, and we sat down to talk about what I had seen. "What do you think?" he began. "I think George Ashton is one hell of a man. I'm proud to have known him," I replied. "Anything else?" "Yes," I said. "One fact. There's been a big change in the kind of scientific work Ashton has done in England. It's all technical. He's been applying his own earlier ideas to developing new materials. But that isn't the type of person he was before. He was a man who thought up new ideas. Everything he did, all of his training was in that direction. Did he just give it up when he came to England? Or has he been applying his mind to something that we don't know anything about?" "You're not too stupid," said Ogilvy. "You're probably right. You can't stop a man thinking, but how can you find out what he's been thinking about?" "Do we know what books he buys, what scientific magazines he reads?" I asked. "Yes. He keeps up to date only in the type of chemistry that is important to his business. Nothing else." We sat for a few minutes in silence, and then I asked, "What does Krieger have to do with Ashton?" "It was his department that helped Ashton escape from Russia after the war. Krieger himself went into Russia to bring him out. Krieger wasn't Lord Krieger then. His name was Palton. Now he's head of his department. When Ashton became an ordinary businessman instead of a scientist with lots of valuable secrets, his records were moved to our department, and Krieger was very annoyed. He always thought that Ashton might do something scientifically useful one day. Although Krieger brought Ashton out of Russia, Ashton never really liked him, and certainly didn't trust him. That's probably why Kriegar's interfering now. He's sure that Ashton has useful ideas that he's hiding from everybody. Is there any news of Ashton? I asked. None at all. We've got people watching the airports and the ports, all the usual things, replied Ogilvy. We must find him. And I want to find the man who threw the acid into Gillian Ashton's face and frightened Ashton so much that he ran away to protect his children from any more attacks. The next day brought little progress. Penny wouldn't speak to me after our quarrel about the search of her room, and nobody had seen Ashton or Benson at any of the airports or seaports. At 3 o'clock, Ogilvy rang me to say that they expected to unlock the strong room at Ashton's house later that afternoon. I want you to be there, listen carefully. When the door is finally opened, only you and the man working on the lock will be present. As soon as the door is opened, you send him out of the room and check what is inside the strong room. If the contents can be moved, you bring them here. If they can't be moved, you close and lock the door again. No one else must see what is in that room. Is that clear? Perfectly clear, I replied. When I arrived at the Ashtons' house once again, I met Lord Kriegar in the hall. He did not look pleased to see me. Ah, Mr. Jaggard, I understand there is a strong room here. Has it been opened yet? I wondered where he got his information, but answered, No, not yet. Good. Then I am in time, said Lord Kriegar. I said, Am I to understand that you wish to be present when the room is opened? That's correct, he replied. I'm afraid that will not be possible. He looked at me thoughtfully. Do you know who I am? Yes, my lord. I have instructions that nobody except myself is to be present when the door is opened. His eyes opened wide with surprise and anger. Did Ogilvy say that? Those were his instructions to me. I don't know if he was thinking of you, my lord. Do you wish to speak to him? There is a telephone in the study. Yes, he replied. I'd better speak to Ogilvy myself. He went off to the study, and I went over to the window and looked out at the garden. A few minutes later, Kriegar came out of the study, looking very angry. He left the house, got into his car, and drove quickly away. The phone rang. It was Ogilvy. Kriegar must not be allowed into that strong room, and he mustn't know what is inside. He won't, I replied. He's gone. We're just about to open the door. Let me know what you find, he said. I went up to Ashton's bedroom. There you are, said the man who was working on the door. You can open it now. I'll have to ask you to leave now, Frank, I told him. He went out and closed the bedroom door behind him. I opened the door to the strong room. Ogilvy's mouth fell open. Empty? Absolutely, I replied. There wasn't a thing in that room. It looks as though it's never been used since it was first built. Who else knows about this? He asked. No one. Only you and I. That's a pity. Kriegar will never believe me when I tell him. Perhaps I should have let him stay with you. I didn't care what Kriegar believed or did not believe, but Ogilvy warned me to be careful. Kriegar is a bad man to have as an enemy. He didn't like the way you treated him today. He didn't show it. He seemed pleasant enough, I replied. That's his way, said Ogilvy. Always polite and pleasant. But don't trust him. Thanks for watching this part. Hope you have enjoyed the reading. See you again in next part.